Afternoon, everyone. Last but one talk of the day, last of the track. You can think of me as the bookend of this track. I have been called worse in the past. We'll do a little show of hands, a little survey, get the energy in the room, because I'm sure you're flagging, but you know, we can do a little survey. So what I thought I would ask is, if you are a developer, and that's a broad sweeping brush, could you raise your hand and keep it in the air? There we go. Now, could you keep your hand up if you are happy with the platforms you use? Oh. Have we got any people who maybe are in the ops or DevOps or SRE field in the room? And keep your hands up if you are. And keep them up if you care if the people that use your platform are happy. My kind of people. You're in the right room. Okay, let's get into this. So I'm going to talk to you today about curating a developer experience. And my name is Andy, as Daniel has said. I'm a big fan of Kubernetes and YAML, so that's me as a Kubernetes resource for the platform engineers amongst you. I work for a company called Flutter UK and Ireland. We are home to some of the biggest brands in sports betting and gaming. We are not the company that does the mobile app framework. I've had a few people ask me about that, but that's not us. And I work as a principal platform engineer in the container platform squad at Flutter. And I spend most of my time developing and building Kubernetes clusters, but with a focus on developer experience. Now, I'm sure you have heard of developer experience, and at the minute, there's a little bit of a vogue interest in it. And I'm sure you have your thoughts and ideas on its perception. But what I need to do for the sake of this talk is kind of align everyone on where I'm coming from on this. So many people might think that developer experience is something to do with developer productivity. It might be something to do with developer portals, or indeed something called developer platforms, which I think are platforms. I don't think there's a lot of difference between them. And there's been a whole bunch of research recently, and this has been mentioned by a couple of people on this stage and in the keynote this morning. And there's a lot of research being put out in the last 18 months by a company called devX, working with Nicole Fosgren of DORA metrics framework and the State of DevOps report, and also the space framework as well. And it's interesting to see how the space framework has evolved into this analysis of developer productivity. And to be fair, there's some very, very compelling numbers there to indicate that developer experience and developer productivity are very closely correlated. I'm not sure I buy into that, and I kind of agree with what Trace said this morning in the keynote. I see developer experience as getting people to use your stuff, and a byproduct of that is developer productivity. But that's mainly because I don't work in finance. But for me, developer experience is more jigsaw pieces to the DevOps puzzle, creating empathy and collaboration between teams across those silos, and really solving the DevOps problem we've all been working on for at least the last decade. And when I read things like the CNCF maturity model, to me it just screams devX all the way through it. Everything it's talking about I see as a devX enabler, if you like. But for me, this is kind of the I suppose, journey we set off to solve in 2019. So I'm going to talk about my experience and my company's experience of implementing devX. But of course, we started this half a decade ago, long before any of this recent research was there. This was really kind of like the end point of the journey we were heading for, this compelling internal product. And that's what we were trying to do. Now, the talk we just had before, if anybody saw Anna speak, was great, and it was very much from kind of like a strategic perspective and a kind of, I suppose, a non-individual contributor perspective. This talk is very much about what you as a platform engineer can do to create a developer experience. And I'm going to explain all the things we did, all the practical things we did, But particularly if you're watching on the video at home, make sure you hang around to the end, because I've got a bit on anti-patterns, and it's really important that you understand those as well as all the things we did. So please hang around to the end. Okay, so this journey, we have to have a starting point in the journey. And for us, we're going to go back to 2016, when it all began. And if you'd have come to QCon in 2016, you would probably have had conversations with people about running Docker in production. Did anybody have those discussions back then? Yeah, hands in the air. Because you were a maverick if you were doing that. You were cutting edge, you were bleeding edge. Well, back at work, we wanted to do that. We wanted to run containers in production. Obviously, we didn't want to do it in a maverick kind of way. We wanted to do it with a proper container orchestration platform. So this document on your screen is the initial proposal document from the BetTribe's next-gen hosting platform. And if you look at it, it doesn't mention containers. It doesn't mention any tech, really. It talks about business value. Outside of the squad, there should be no humans involved in the value stream between feature and customer. That sounds a little bit like devX to me. Don't know about you, but getting to a point where you are releasing code to your customers quickly and safely without having to race tickets with other teams for networks or storage or compute. And after many POCs and evaluations, the small team that was put together in 2016 settled on Kubernetes. I think that was a very good choice. The platform itself, just as a bit of background from the technical perspective, was predating all of the turnkey solutions. There was no EKS, there was no GKE, no AKS. None of those tools were there, so we built things the hard way. Primarily built out of Makefiles, Terraform, and Container Linux. And that's still largely the foundation of it, even today. And it was built out initially in AWS and later on-prem. And we worked with a customer to create this platform. Building platforms without customers is a recipe for shelfware, and we didn't want to do that. So we worked closely with the team to implement a solution for them. We followed the platform as a product paradigm all the way through this. So not only was it a Kubernetes engine, it also had integrations and automation around firewalls, load balancers, storage, logs, monitoring, and a whole bunch of other stuff, DNS certs, eventually. And we rolled this out, and the platform worked. And slowly over time, we had other development teams come on board. It's going really well. We put R back in place at this point because we've got multi-tenant. And it's all going swimmingly. If we go fast forward to 2018, it's a really big success. Development teams prefer using the Kubernetes platform to the VM infrastructure and infrastructure as code. And I joined the team, and I was very surprised when I joined the team that none of the engineers in the platform team or in the container platform teams were particularly happy. We got a product which was a great success, lots of adoption. Why are we not happy about this? And it turns out really we were struggling with a whole load of growing pains. Our ways of working didn't scale. Code bases were treading on each other's toes with it, and all sorts of unhappy engineers as a result. So in 2019, we made some changes. We split the container platform team into 3 squadlets, should we say, or 3 teams. We created an engine team who looked after the building and the running of the cluster. We had a capabilities team that looked after all of those integrations, so logging, monitoring, storage, firewalls, load balancers, etc. And then we created a little bit of an experimental team, this one here. We called it the customer experience team. You could equally have called it the developer experience team because our customers are developers. They are the people using our platform. And we're a bit of an experiment. Nobody's done this before. So we're going to try, and if we fail, well, we'll do something else, we'll pivot. But we can fail safely if we need to. And I got involved in heading up this team. So we're basically given a blank sheet of paper, a free remit to go and do devX. Okay, where do we start? What do we do? We've got to work that out. So the first thing we do is we think, what would the DevOps handbook tell us to do? And a lot of wisdom in there would tell us you can't work out if you're improving things unless you measure them. So we set out to create a kind of state of container platforms report, a very small version of the state of DevOps report. And to do that, we put together a survey. Easy to fill in, only a couple of checkboxes and a few options and some free-form text. And we send that out to roughly about 350 engineers. Not all of them are using our platform, so we're not expecting a massive return on that. And we get 31 responses, so roughly about 10%, which we're quite happy with. We've been happy with 5%, to be honest. And the format of the survey asked teams which area of the business they worked in. We made it anonymous because we wanted to hear the unpleasant as well as the pleasant, so we got honest feedback. We asked which clusters the teams were using because we had a couple of different clusters, and we asked which of those capabilities the teams were using, so were they using the DNS automation, the firewall automation, the load balancers. And then we put in something called usability statements, and these proved to be very, very useful. So a usability statement goes something like, I find doing X on the cluster easy. Do you strongly disagree? Disagree. Agree. Strongly agree. And there's about 9 of these for various features of the cluster. I'll go through the numbers in a minute, so when we do the year-on-year comparison. But I suppose the TLDR on this is the numbers were really good. We got lots of amazing feedback in the free-form fields. We did get some, not negative feedback, but certainly constructive. But they told us stuff we already knew. Our documentation was a mess, and our onboarding process was somewhat complex. So we knew that. And we had something to aim at, and we've now got a baseline for what we do next. So, what do we do? Well, that's a very good question. What do we do as a team? And we thought we should probably write that down. So, in my naivety, I found this thing called an OKR template. I didn't know what one was at the time, but I do now. So I filled it in very badly. But what we were going to use this for was really as a mission statement and areas of focus. So you can see from here, we've said we're going to engage, empower, and support our customers. And under those 3 areas, there's various, I suppose, areas we could focus on, sub-areas, and then some actual tangible things we could do. And this was super powerful because it made us as a team know what we were meant to be doing. And if we were asked to do anything that really wasn't on that list, we really shouldn't be doing it. So we had a really good starting point, and it's super important that we did that. Okay. Who are our customers? Who are these development teams? Well, we know the ones that wander up to our desk in the days when you could wander up to desks and interrupt us. We knew the ones which would ping us on Slack, but that's not everyone. There's quite a lot of engineers using this cluster. But who are they? And we have a chatbot mechanism for raising support requests. You don't raise tickets, you go into the support channel, create a command, that'll summon a support engineer. You'll hopefully be able to exchange words and solve the problem and then close off the help request. But in the background, all of that transcript goes into a Jira ticket. Nobody uses it, you use the chatbot interface, but it's there as a record. And we realized we've got 3 years worth of these Jira tickets from when we created the platform. And we thought, well, if somebody's raised a ticket, they must be one of our customers. They must be one of our developers that are using the platform. So we used that information. The first thing we did was we were kind of on a bit of a run with this analysis of Jira tickets. So we created an FAQ. We didn't have one. We took 3 months worth of tickets, identified the frequently asked questions, and wrote some frequently answered questions, if you get that. And we put it on our wiki, we signposted it to support channels, hopefully reduce a bit of toil. But we now had a list of people that used our cluster. But that really wasn't very useful. Where did they work? Which teams were they in? All we got is names. So we went diving into the various wikis and found some org charts. We were very surprised. Some of them were even up to date. And what we did, this is going to sound pretty, I suppose, childish and crazy, but we printed them off really big on multi-page A3, and then we glued them together and we stuck them on a whiteboard. And then what we did was we took some whiteboard pens, because we're super advanced, and we marked on everyone on the org chart that had raised a help desk ticket. And suddenly we could see the areas of the business that were using our stuff. And we'd already started doing some training at this point. So another colour we marked on there, who'd had training. And suddenly we got this overlay of who was asking for help, who'd already had the training, and we could see where the intersection was or wasn't and where it should be. And even areas of the business weren't even using our stuff, but could, so we could do some kind of marketing to them. So we created a very, very primitive form of CRM system, but it let us know who the heck we should be talking to. Which leads us on to the next thing, and the thing we as techies do not really like doing. We have to go and talk to these people. Ooh, okay. Thought that. I don't think I've ever had a job interview when people have asked me what my engagement skills are like with other people or how my meeting administration is. Don't know if you've had that. But what I think as techies is for stand-ups and retros, we are very good at them. We know exactly the format. We know what good looks like there. Meetings where we try and decide getting stuff done, maybe it's just the people I work with. I don't find us quite so good. We don't tend to like send out agendas. We don't tend to chair a meeting. We don't take minutes, do we? And follow-up actions seem sometimes like they just happen by luck rather than judgment. I don't know if that's your experience. So what we decided to do was create meetings with these customers we'd identified. So we got 4 tribes, create a meeting each month. We went for monthly cadence rather than quarterly. We thought we'd be able to create some engagement and relationship if we did that. So 4 meetings each month. And we had a set structure to this. Now, we made it open invite. Anyone could come, even if they didn't work in that tribe, but we wanted to make sure we had an open door policy. And the format of this session would be, we go through the actions from the previous meeting, so we can see what people have done and whether they've followed up on stuff. Then we have updates from the container platform team. So what have we been working on? What features are coming to the cluster? Are there any maintenance windows? Is there any updates they need to know about? And then we flip it round and we get feedback from the tribe. So we ask for updates about what they're working on, any problems they've had, any blockers, anything we can do. But we also try and get a steer on capacity. What have you got coming up? Being a sports betting company, we've got, various football and other sporting events that can require a lot of resource and spikes in traffic. So we try and get a steer on that as in advance as we can. And then we actually write up all of that meeting. We minute it, attribute who said what in the meeting, and write some follow-up actions as well. And then we make those minutes public so that anyone who was in the meeting can see what their follow-up actions were. If they weren't in the meeting, they'll probably get notified anyway that somebody's delegated something for them to do, and they probably should have come to the meeting to say no. But more importantly, this was a mechanism we could take back to the engine team and the capabilities team, and we could talk to them about what people were using their stuff for. What were they doing on the cluster? Is there anything we can help? Occasionally, we would create feature tickets to get work done to improve the cluster for our customers. Some things would go on our roadmap about future updates and maybe larger pieces of work. But also, we could hook engineers up between the tribes and the capabilities or the engine team to go and work together. So we were using it to create these feedback loops. The other thing we did, with them being in the open, was it gave visibility to our boss of what we've been doing. Remember, we're an experiment. It gives us accountability. They can see what we're doing and judge if we are delivering any value for them. We also did some actual technical work as well, because with certain things we needed to implement for our customers. So we had some feedback that our onboarding process was difficult. We put some automation around that to simplify it a bit. It's still kind of complicated even today. But the main thing we did was work out, after 3 years of organic growth, who owned everything on the cluster. Because it turns out that spreadsheet someone created 18 months ago hadn't been updated quite as regularly as it needed to be. So we went through the arduous process of finding owners for everything on the cluster. And rather than putting it in a spreadsheet, what we did is we put metadata on the namespaces. So we actually use that as the source of truth. So we put labels on for which tribe owned this workload, which squad owned this workload, and which Slack channel we needed to use if there was any problems with the workloads in there. Now, this was incredibly useful, even though it was time-consuming, because what it let us do was use that metadata programmatically in the cluster. So the first thing we did was we addressed the problems we had with our logging pipelines. they could get very noisy, particularly in test environments with noisy neighbor syndrome. So we sharded our logging pipeline. We created a pipeline per tribe, and then the log shipping software would use the label for the tribe on the namespace of the workload to ship that log message to the correct pipeline. So that worked really well. And we used it for loads of other stuff as well. Okay, so let's talk about numbers. It's the end of our first year. We send our survey out again. We got 31 responses to start with. We've only got 25. I don't know if you remember, but July 2020 was rather different to July 2019. So there's a little bit of survey fatigue around at the minute. So we're not too upset by that. Again, the overall feedback we get is super positive, but we start seeing these usability statements as particularly useful as a trend analysis and indicator of what people think of the cluster. So you'll remember these usability statements were, I find doing X on the cluster easy, strongly disagree, disagree red, agree, strongly agree green. So although there's an overarching green trend here, you can see in the second year there's not too much of a difference. Most notably, our documentation, which is this one here, has been flagged as actually getting worse. So we've probably got some work to do in our year ahead. But these were incredibly useful to give us steers on what people thought of the individual features rather than just what they were using. Into our second year. So we decided to change our tact a little bit here. Rather than reaching out to teams and saying, how can we help you to make the cluster better? We actually change the tact a little and say, how can we all work together to make this cluster better? Try and create a little bit of shared responsibility because we want developers to do the right thing on the cluster. What is the right thing? We'll write that down, shouldn't we? So what we do is we work with the tribes and we come up with a series of, I'm going to say best practices. I know that's kind of an unpopular term, but I'm going to call them best practices, of what good looks like for a workload on the cluster. So we break these into three areas. There's build, deploy, and run. We prioritize these by Moscow. So must have, should have, could have, will have. I think that's what they are. So we got some kind of like ranking on them. And what we realize is for the run ones, there's about 20 of them. We can codify these, use Open Policy Agent. And then we can use Gatekeeper to kind of record the status of each of the workloads against that policy. And then we wrote an exporter that would take that data and stick it in our metrics store. And we used those labels of tribe, squad, and namespace. And we could break them down by it. We produced a dashboard which would allow us to look at the state of workloads on the cluster and slice and dice it by the various checks or by the tribe or by the squad. Incredibly powerful. So we could track workloads which were misbehaving and reach out to teams if we needed to. Just to be clear, on these best practices, we didn't write them. We collated them, we edited them, and we published them, but they were put together by the people using our cluster. This isn't us enforcing rules, this is us getting them to tell us what they think good looks like. Getting buy-in because they wrote them. And then cost is a thing. So we produce some rudimentary cost reports in Excel, because Excel is good, right? And again, we take the cost information out the AWS cluster, we use the usage data, which is broken down by tribe, squad, and namespace, because we've got those metrics. And we can produce a retrospective report for the last 30 days, which is better than nothing. It's not ideal, but it means we can put some visibility of cost in front of our users. And we can introduce the compliance metrics, as we called them, based on the best practices, and the cost information into our meetings. So we can have a little section after we've all exchanged information about what we're all up to and talk about the actual data. So we can do trend analysis on this. We can flag up workloads which are maybe costing a little bit more than they did the month before. Is there something up? We can flag up any workloads which are tagged as severe in terms of criticality and compliance metrics. And teams can go away and look at those. And we can do trend analysis over time. And we're getting to the stage where we could start using SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs based off these numbers. We never got to that point, but we could have extended it into that. Our survey said, your documentation isn't very good, so we decided to fix that. Not a fun process. There was over 500 documents, but we went through them, we removed the duplicates, we updated the out-of-date ones, we added ones which were missing, and we restructured it by maintainer and by customer and by product. And it was so much better afterwards. A lot of work, but glad we did it. And that brings us on to the survey of 2021. We're back up to 30 responses this time. Woo! It's gone back up, but it should be a lot higher. We've got a lot more people using the cluster. And despite our best efforts of pestering and nagging people, and nagging people's boss, and their boss's boss, and their boss's boss's boss, we still only get 30 responses. So we're a little bit disappointed with that, but as you can see from the usability statements, it's getting greener, which is a very good statistical analysis technique. But things are improving, so we're really happy about that. Okay, into our next year. And this is more of what we call gardening rather than policing. We're very much encouraging teams to do the right thing. We're not going to come down heavy-handed. We're going to encourage teams to help in this mission to make the cluster a better place for everyone. To do that, we decided to build some tooling that shifts left, but makes it easy if we shift left. We're not just YOLOing things at people and saying, your problem now. We're actually building tooling which helps people. So our cost reports were in Excel, hard to distribute, immediately out of date, and only showed the previous month. So what we did is we pulled the cost data out of AWS into our metric store, and then we could build a dashboard which showed by tribe, squad, and namespace the actual cost metrics for each of the workloads on the cluster. Wasn't completely real time, it's about 24 hours out of date, but what it does do is this uses the same dashboard system as the ones our developers use to build their applications or build their own dashboards. So we're moving the data source as close to them as possible so they can use it if they want. We also discovered quite by accident that another team was using our compliance data. They have a little bot that runs in their platform team's Slack channel. And as part of the output from that, as well as upcoming changes or anything important to them, they've included the compliance metrics based on our data. They pull that across. I thought that was kind of cool. We didn't even know about that at the time. Now, what I haven't spoken about so far is developer tooling. And when we created the cluster in 2016, there weren't many options for developer tooling. We built out some basic pipelines with that first customer. But really, culturally in the organization, there was a whole bunch of autonomy. So we didn't really feel as though it was our job at the time to get involved with their SDLC. Rightly or wrongly, over time, the teams developed various ways to deploy their applications using their own tooling. But what came out of this through lots of evolution over a couple of years was an inner source framework for a golden path, originally built by the Bet tribe. But this wasn't built by us, even though we did have some input on it. This was built by a platform team in Bet, working with their development teams, a developer platform for developers, you might say. Had a series of managed based images, which are rebuilt weekly with a couple of different language runtimes in. Teams can use that base image to build another image with their application in, and then there's a Helm chart which wraps all the complicated Kubernetes stuff, and we'll take that image and deploy it onto the cluster through pipelines which are created as part of this. And it abstracts a whole load of technical stuff like service meshes and stuff, so they don't have to worry about that. One of the really compelling things about this, though, was when the team put this golden path together, is they worked with the SLM teams and got parts of the acceptance into service process, which all workloads have to go through, pre-blessed. So if you use the golden path framework, it meant that you didn't have as much red tape to do to get your application live. I think that's probably quite appealing to engineers, having to do less paperwork. And this was adopted into inner source and is used by lots of teams around the business. So, yeah, some cross-tribe adoption there. I haven't spoken about training. Training is super, super, super important to the success of our platform. We'd already started doing some basic training long before we were doing any kind of like developer experience work. We did a one-day workshop where we taught you how to build a Kubernetes application, and the first thing we insisted on you being told about was 12-factor apps and that you should build your applications in that way. And then we had another one-day workshop of the successes of that, where we gave you an application and we gave you access to our test cluster. And if you were on the course, you would deploy this application to the test cluster and we would teach you how to add storage, load balancers, monitoring, logging, and a little bit of load testing as well. The theory being, if you had been on these two workshops, you would probably be reasonably confident to be able to deploy an application to live on our clusters with only asking us minimal support. We also did a theory course as well, because not everybody wants to spend 2 days of their life elbow deep in YAML. I would. So to date, we've had 507 people through this course. You could argue it's 250 because some of them have done the basic course and the advanced course. But that's still nearly 3,000 people training hours. And we always send a survey out afterwards to see what people thought. And the net promoter score we get off the back of that is always incredibly high, usually somewhere between 90 and 96%. So we're super proud of that. It got so popular, our training at one point, that we actually had a tribute act doing my course, which was weird, in another tribe. They took our training material and ran it themselves. I think that was a compliment. Okay, we sent out the survey this time, and we disappointingly only got 19 responses. And boy, did we try to get that number up. But you can see from the usability statements, it's gone particularly well. It's a success. So all's well with our devX efforts, right? So coming into the next year, what do we do? Well, this might sound a little counterintuitive, particularly for those of you that are thinking about riding the devX hype curve at the minute, but we decided to scale it back. There were certain signs that this wasn't delivering what it did previously. Our customers were very different. They weren't like this anymore, like they were in 2019. They were more like this now. We worked quite a lot with these platform teams inside of the tribes. We didn't really work so closely with the end developers as we did. So what that meant, if we looked at kind of evidence, so if we look at kind of like qualitative metrics, we could tell from the meetings that we were kind of having the same conversations with the same people. It was with those platform teams. It wasn't with the developers anymore. And we'd kind of taken all the low-hanging fruit. We'd, got all the easy wins and a lot of the medium ones. And really, we were getting diminishing returns out of doing this. And I suppose the thing is as well that internally, we'd become a lot more operationally focused. We were a lot better at managing and running the cluster than we'd ever been. We kind of knew if things weren't working out right for our customers and for the developers. We could go and actually reach out to them. We could be a lot more proactive than maybe reactive as we were in the past. I suppose those development teams and platform teams inside the tribe had also matured as well. They were getting very adept at running their applications and not really needing as much help from us as they did previously. But what about numbers? Is there any numbers to back up whether this was the case or even whether this has actually had a negative impact in deciding at the beginning of 2023 to scale this back? Well, I haven't got any good metrics, unfortunately, but I have got some numbers. So this is the number of help desk requests over the last 5 years per week. And you can see in the early days as we went through adoption, we needed to provide a lot of support. But more recently, that's decreased quite significantly. And if we look at 2023, if not providing that developer experience function was causing problems, we'd have expected to see an increase again, and we didn't see that. However, this is help desk requests. Help desk requests are of different complexities, different times, the different effort required to resolve them. So it's not a great metric. And you might say, well, okay, are you still getting workloads put on the cluster? Is there still expansion there? And I don't have 5 years worth of data, so apologies for that. But this is our CPU requests over time. And certainly in the last few years, we keep seeing a 20% increase year on year on CPU requests. So there's definitely increasing workloads. But what you might also say then, and challenge me on, is there's more stuff, but is it new stuff? Is it not just people turning the replicas up? Is it not just the dials being turned up? Well, if we look at the number of namespace creations, we can see that's still happening Maybe not as much as it was in the early days, but we're certainly still getting new applications being deployed to the cluster. So I suppose this is kind of the takeaway, is that our developer experience creates experienced developers and platform engineers. Don't forget that. They have their own frameworks and tools. They have their own domain-specific knowledge and documentation, and they're kind of self-sufficient now. They don't need to rely on us as much as they did previously. And the other thing to just remind ourselves about is we are a team that build and run a Kubernetes platform. We don't build workloads that deal with massive traffic spikes on Saturday afternoon when someone scores a goal. That's what those teams do. They're adept at building those kind of applications to deal with spiky workloads, which are, I suppose a lot of teams would never see outside of sports betting. So they got really good at that. Now, we haven't completely stopped our developer experience efforts. We are still very much doing it proactively. We still reach out to teams if we see problems. We still will monitor for things like capacity asks and like the load tests that are happening around Grand National this weekend. But we're not adverse to going and working with teams if they have some brittle applications and helping them solve problems with that if we can help. So what's next? What are we going to do next? Well, our platform is from 2016, as I say, and there's not a great deal of a lot of change in the actual structure of the cluster itself. But we're now part of a larger organization. We've got a whole bunch of other brands we can work with who aren't using containers yet. So we're looking at to build out a container platform that's for all of the brands across the organization, that's going to be more modern, more scalable, and more supportable than the platform we got at the minute. But to do that, we're not going to do everything ourselves quite as we did before. We've got extra functionality which we can lean on in our organization. As a cloud engagement team that look after all the AWS accounts and make sure they're secure, we want to be provisioning Kubernetes clusters in those accounts. How can we do that securely? We need their help to do that to make sure that we're still compliant and follow the governance that they put in place. There's a team called Developer Experience, which is slightly confusing given the title of this talk, but they're more of a tooling and automation team that exists in the wider business. And what we need to do is we need to expand their work in their tooling and automation so it extends into a containerized environment and allows teams that have never touched containers before to continue to use those tools and services to deploy containerized applications. Observability is a massive talking point in this industry. And what we don't want to do is have metrics, logs, and traces which are just local to our cluster. There's a centralized team that are running a platform for that. We can use that service to send our metrics and our logs and our traces to that, and that can provide visibility across the whole organization, across different platforms, not just our Kubernetes clusters. And then we already work really closely with our service lifecycle management folks for compliance and for governance, but they have other functions. They have like capacity functionality. They reach out to teams and manage capacity. We can teach them about Kubernetes, and we can use their contacts and their ways of working to introduce container capacity questions into that workflow. So this might be something like we're going to do. We're still working on this. We're hoping to have our first customer live in autumn, but it will mean that we can be deploying Kubernetes clusters on behalf of our customers and managing them for them so they don't have to deal with the operational complexity of managing a Kubernetes cluster themselves. It also opens the door for more devX. We're going to have a whole bunch of users which haven't used containers before, so we can build on all the stuff that we've done previously and all the new research that's come out, and I think that's super exciting. All the evolution of the space framework and the work that's been done by devX and Nicole, we can start bringing that into our workflows and the way we work and do things in a much more modern way than we were before and leveraging on that experience. Okay, let's summarize. So, these were the things we made and did. These were the things we made and did that took us from a team that said, how can we help, through to a team, how can we all help, through to a team that was data-driven. We built tooling that helped teams understand the workloads on the cluster and also gave them visibility of their costs and training to be able to empower them to do that. And ultimately, we decided when to claw things back as well. And we were brave enough to do that and understand when that was the right thing to do. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here of things you can go and do in your organization. And they're kind of practical and you could go and do them. But I just want to show some anti-patterns on this. I have seen teams try and emulate our success a little bit, but kind of not doing things properly. So I see teams trying to do a little bit of DX rather than actually committing to it. This was my job for 4 years. It's a lot of work. I don't think you can do it on the cheap or shortcut to do it. It takes effort, it takes rigor, it takes discipline, there's process. Sending around a survey via an email is super easy to do to everyone on a distribution list. But that survey needs to be right. You only get one chance at doing that. So at least read Accelerate. It's got a great chapter on how to build surveys and how to analyze the results. If you have research functions inside your organization, go and talk to them. Doing research and understanding metrics is an actual job. It's a proper thing. Go and get help to do that if you can. Don't create a Slack channel, invite people in and say that is your communication mechanism for developer experience. In my experience, you have to go and meet with people, even if it's on Zoom, at least monthly, not quarterly, and create those engagements and that feedback, those feedback loops. Build those relationships. Jeske earlier talked about trust as a currency and building trust and how you can save it and spend it. That's where that happens in those meetings. Training is super important, and I've seen teams put in a whole load of effort creating amazing screen recordings, but they go out of date so quickly. And if the subject matter of that recording changes, editing it's really hard. Creating good video is really hard in the first place, but updating it is a real time-consuming effort. For us, we found updating a repo with some demo files in and changing a few PowerPoint slides for the next session of training much more efficient to do. And I know that not everybody likes in-person training or webinar-based stuff, but we found it really, really worked for the majority. And then there's my favorite team. We know what our customers need. They just know what they want, and it's not the same. If you see your customers or the users of your services as a problem or an inconvenience and give them names like PEBCAC and wetware, I don't know that devX is really something you should be doing. If when you get asked for something, your first reaction is, what do you want that for? You want how much? Maybe this stuff isn't for you. You've got to actually want to support your customers and make this happen. And I hear this, well, we've tried everything. They just won't engage with us. They won't talk with us. Well, 2 slides ago, I gave a big list of things you can do and how to do it. So you can do that. You just have to actually try. Okay, let me wrap up with the final slide. This was a job. It took effort. It takes process. And it's a bit of a weird job as well. It isn't for everyone. This is a socio-technical problem to solve. It's about creating relationships, feedback loops, and engagement. It's a people problem, sorry. Installing tools is ace, but just installing, say, a developer portal for the sake of it isn't going to solve your broken culture. You need to, and that's not to say developer portals aren't applicable at all. For certain use cases, they're very applicable. But if all you're trying to do is build relationships with your users, it might not be. It might be. And I suppose the big takeaway is understand when this is done, when you've reached the end of the journey. Speaking of which, that's where we are now. So thanks for, hang on, I've got an exclusive slide for you. Wait, cliffhanger. Thanks for listening. That is me on the socials if you want to reach out to me. I am going to be around for the rest of the day anyway, so do come and talk to me, and don't be shy. I don't bite. I'm really quite friendly. But I don't know if you've seen this before, but apparently, and this is an exclusive, we're looking for feedback on the talks. I don't know if you've seen this slide before. So if you could provide some feedback, that would be super, not only for myself, but for the track organisers as well. Just a warning, I take bad feedback really bad. Get quite upset. So, yeah, think carefully before you leave your feedback. But, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you.